Hello and welcome back to This Is Our Story. Very special occasion because for the first time, not the first time ever, to be clear, but the first time in the history of this podcast, Briar and I are in the same room. Hello, Briar.
Hi.
We're currently in a makeshift quote-unquote studio environment, which basically means in her lounge room, huddled near the microphone. And I feel like I'm basically within uncomfortable distance away from you right now.
Thought I could smell your breath.
Jesus. Anyway, it's very good to be here and very good to be in the same place. Obviously, Briar and I haven't actually seen each other for a year, so we've just been doing lots of catching up. I think it's perhaps tempting for you guys as a listener to probably think our conversations in the podcast are perhaps, a little bit, what's the word? Formulaic, constructed, fake. But actually we have a lot of these same conversations.
It's very organic, actually.
Yeah, we have a lot of these conversations, just Briar and I offline all the time. It just feels like we're constantly living a podcast now. It's kind of hard to separate.
It's weird because it doesn't feel like we're talking to you guys. It literally just feels like we're talking to each other. And then when we share the podcast, it's weird when you get feedback because it's like, oh, that's right, other people are listening to this.
Yeah, someone threw a reference the other day, in a conversation about the fact that I was a drummer. I was like, hold on a second, I didn't tell you I was a drummer. Okay.
That's right, we're kind of sharing this with the world.
Anyway, we're just going to get straight into it because we've still got quite a lot of things to cover, and we're not necessarily running out of time, but I guess the elephant in the room, or whale in the room,
thanks,
is that Briar is actually, we haven't referred to this yet already, I don't think, in the podcast, but that you're basically about to pop with a wee baby on the way, and so that's definitely going to be taking up all of your time, and so we're going to be moving on to other things podcast-wise, but that is obviously means that we need to keep things rolling, and ironically, me talking about this is keeping that from rolling on. But okay, let's get straight into story time, and the topic of today for story time is actually something I've been kind of thinking about and reflecting on for a little while, and that is the topic of kind of life lessons, because we've been doing a lot of reflection. That's what this whole podcast is about. Just thinking about all the little lessons that we have learned throughout our lives, but specifically, what are the things that or in my case, what have I picked up from my childhood that I've taken into adulthood, maybe from mum and dad or from other parts of, sections of my life that I still carry with me all the time. And Briar and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I think, I don't know, Briar, do you want to talk about the first one?
Yeah, I actually had to think about this for a little bit.
Because sometimes you don't know until you think consciously about it.
Exactly, I was going to say is you do things sort of unconsciously and then think, I wonder why I do that. But actually, when I had a few minutes to think about it, I realised that, and it's not necessarily something I was taught, but I guess it was role modelled to us. When we were kids, Mum used to do a lot of baking, and they both led busy lifestyles. I think they probably for the time earned a reasonable amount of money. But there was obviously, looking back now, you realise that there was obviously some really tough times financially. And Mum used to bake a lot. She used to make meals from scratch with seemingly nothing. And that's something actually that I feel like I have picked up on. I can literally open the cupboards, there'll be nothing, and I can make a really nice meal. And my partner's like, where did you get all this stuff from? I thought we had nothing. And I'm like, I don't know. It just you just pull together and scrape together everything and just make it work. And I remember having, we were laughing about this yesterday. We used to have things like basmati rice, which you'd have left over from the night before. We would turn it into a rice pudding.
Well, this is what mum called it.
Yeah, to make it exciting for us kids. But we would have just leftover rice in the fridge, would add milk and brown sugar and call it rice pudding. Sometimes we'd have it cold, other times we'd heat it. I don't know how we didn't get food poisoning.
There's no way I'd eat that now. Not a chance.
We should try it.
I've described this to other people, and especially like some of my Asian friends, when they hear about that, they're like, oh my God, that's disrespectful to the rice.
Which, telling my partner too, he thinks it's hilarious. He's like, what the fuck? I should try it again just to see what it's like. But we loved it though. Well, I was like, rice, there's leftover rice.
Well, because I think at the time, mum and dad had a really strong ethos in terms of poverty is like a mindset, right? And this is something that perhaps comes from a Christian background, but just if you don't have much, that you don't necessarily have to live like you don't have much, if that makes sense. So we, as children, we didn't really notice the fact that we didn't have money, because mum and dad never made a big deal about it, and we just carried on. But in hindsight, there were always clues.
Yeah, definitely. Looking back, you can see things like, when things were tight, it's like, oh, okay, that must have been a bit of a tough time. But it was a positive thing, actually, that they didn't let on to us. Things like Christmas, we never really got lots of presents anyway. It just wasn't really a big deal in our household. So it wasn't like we were used to getting, lavished with presents, and then one year we didn't, kind of thing. So,
so generally mum and dad were, mum even more so, she still is, just very, very thrifty. And even now, when she's financially comfortable, she'll still take her own tea bags out. She'll still make her own sandwiches.
Embarrassingly so.
Make her own sandwiches to take everywhere. It's just, but it's a valuable thing to have within bounds, obviously. You don't want to be so thrifty that you kind of miss out on having fun.
So that's one thing that I probably took away from, and it's an important one to take away, I think, because I've definitely used that over the years when things were tight. So thanks, Mum, I guess.
Well, another one that I've definitely held on to, and I've caught myself thinking about this now, even recently as an adult, is to never show up somewhere empty-handed. So if I ever go to somebody's house, a party, or even just, I don't know, like a random get-together with a friend even, like I'll basically try to always show up with something. And I never think about it. I just make sure I always take some snacks or, what have you. And even now, because this is something that mum and dad instilled in us from a really young age. I remember mum saying it over and over again, actually, when we were young. But I always found it really hard to, when people showed up somewhere without anything. Like if they came to our house or we went to someone else's party and they never brought anything.
It felt rude, didn't it?
It felt so rude. And I remember one specific example, years ago now, but I was at a party and this guy showed up. Well, first he hadn't been invited, so that's already a red flag for me. But then he came in and he just basically dived into all the food that everyone else had brought and then ended up leaving early. I was like, what a prick. And that was like the lowest form of disrespect. And now that I think about it, I was like, where did that come from? People have different values, and this is just one particular value that mum and dad had instilled as being something that was really important. Yeah, and I think probably we don't want to take up too much time with these things before we get into the kind of the main body of our episode. But following along from, I suppose they all feel very similar actually. This mantra, which is very Christian based, but we are blessed to be a blessing. And
that sounds so corny, but
well, it is. It's cringy, but to blessed to be a blessing, if it's not easy enough to understand, is that if you are given something, and if you perhaps in Christian terms, if your cup is overflowing, you've got too much than what you need to get by, then the reason that you have that is to be generous and give to others. And I think there's something really valuable in that. And that's, I suppose, a lesson from Christianity. But mum and dad, especially mum, used to say this often. We're blessed to be a blessing. And it still stays with me now in the fact that, because there are negative sides to this as well, because I've often have felt very uncomfortable spending money on myself, because I feel that if I've got a little bit too much,
you shouldn't be spending on yourself.
Exactly, and I should be giving it away constantly. And even now I feel like a pang of guilt every time I spend money on myself, because I probably should be being generous. So I don't know. I think there are probably plenty of people out there who would tell me that, it's okay to enjoy life for yourself. And it's probably more about balance, really. Yeah. But it's just another lesson that is there living inside me. Yeah. I think we'll probably move on then, because we don't want to take up too much time on these particular things. I'm just watching the time tick away. But if we could carry on from our last episode where we were...
Hopefully with less tears.
Yeah. Talking about the fact that Briar and I, our paths had crossed again in London. I was there having the time of my life, but simultaneously depressed because of all the stuff that was going on in my home life. And concurrently, in her own timeline, Briar was also having the same experience, kind of starting to become independent and enjoy life again, but her partner was in a different time and space. And when we finished off, we'd just covered the part where Briar's relationship had come apart, and then I had, to my chagrin and to my shame, had just basically walked out, and I didn't really want to have anything to do with her anymore. And as I explained briefly in the last episode, I understand that now is kind of like I was trying to separate myself from the fact, well, I'm trying to put this into words. I found it really hard because I think I really wanted to leave, but I knew that I wasn't strong enough to be able to leave. And I found it really confronting, because I'd been putting up with so much bullshit for so many years. And I thought it was, on the one hand, it was like, shit, I want to do that, but I can't. And then on the other hand, it was like, how dare she give up so easily? Of course, I didn't know the full story and the background anyway. I was just purely projecting my own personal relationship issues onto somebody else. Anyway, I'll just carry on the story from there, because as mentioned already, we basically had no contact. So I was in the same city, but we just did not speak. No texting, no nothing. And I just tried to carry on with my life and try and ignore the bullshit at home and enjoy London. And I did enjoy London a lot. I carried on at uni. Uni was quite full on for me, because the expectations there were really high. So I had heaps of exams and heaps of essays, and it was basically impossible to get good grades. It was really quite annoying. But I did really enjoy being there, because as I talked about last time, just London is such an intoxicating place, and I just loved being able to walk out and, right in Waterloo, just walking across the Waterloo Bridge and looking down the Thames and seeing, London Bridge down there and at the end, and the Tower Bridge, and then Parliament down the other end. It was just...
It's quite magical, isn't it?
It is very magical, and it lived up to all my... Even though I didn't really have expectations, well, I thought I didn't, it just met them all. And I loved it. Absolutely loved London. In terms of what I did, my uni semester was quite short. I probably only studied for about 6 to 8 weeks, and then they had a holiday, and then that was done. So then I didn't want to go home after my semester, and so I decided to get a job. We'd already joined a church there. We'd made a few friends, and I know life in London was good enough for me to actually start thinking I didn't want to go, quote unquote, home. And I actually really wanted to stay in London, really wanted to stay. And I joined a catering company, and it's a bit random actually, but it was a French catering company.
See, all this stuff I don't know.
Yeah. They basically they were hired to bring in all the gear for these really high class catering events. So this would involve me going out at all. You imagine when parties are on, they're in the evenings, right? And these huge, I'm talking high society. And I got to go to some amazing places around London. But you'd come in before the party, bring in all the stuff, tables, chairs, cups, cutlery, everything, and set it up. Well, not necessarily set up, but at least drop it off. And then we'd have to come back afterwards. So that would be like really late at night. So I was doing really long hours. And I mean, I was really tired at that time, but kind of also just really enjoying the experience. I got to see it all over London, and even got to go out to Cambridge for one event, and it was pretty cool way to see London and get paid for it. It did mean I didn't really have a lot of time to go on holidays and stuff. Like all my other classmates from they would be traveling all over Europe and stuff, and I didn't get to do any of that. My partner was very stingy, didn't want to. She was working as well, but she didn't want to be making lots of holidays and spending lots of money. And it's
how frustrating looking back, because that's why you go to London.
It was the one time that I really was able to just see the world and experience everything. I don't have really any regrets about life, because I don't think there's any point. But this is the one thing I wish I would have taken advantage of, living life to its fullest at that moment, because I did miss out on a lot of that type of stuff. We did go on one trip to Germany. That was it was an amazing trip. We basically my partner's mum had been sending letters to this guy in Germany for her whole life, ever since school. Basically an old school pen pal. And throughout their lives, they'd be just sending letters and keeping in touch, which is quite nice, I think. Pretty old school, obviously. Wouldn't do that now. But we'd organised to meet up with him and his wife in Germany. He's an older guy. He was in his 50s, 60s maybe. And we stayed with him and, went to Berlin. He picked us up. So he lived in Dresden. He drove up and picked us up in Berlin. Not a small thing.
No.
And then took us down to Dresden. We stayed at his house. He showed us all the way around Dresden. He drove us down to Munich. We went to the Sandstone Mountains on the way in Bavaria, and went into Austria for the day. It was awesome. And we did that over 2 weeks. That was a pretty awesome experience. We had one of the things that makes this trip so memorable is that while we were there, so my partner and I, we were kind of on pretty good terms at this stage, but it's also, when you're on holiday, it's a different environment. Yeah. You're not the same people. No. You're kind of caught up in the excitement of seeing these amazing places. And I was also really happy and probably ignoring a lot of stuff too, and unhealthy stuff. But we had this pregnancy scare. No, I label it a scare retrospectively. Looking back.
Did it not feel like that at the time? Did it excite you?
I think it scared us both at first. And then she got excited and I realized I wasn't. And I was freaking out. And I felt really guilty about that because I knew this was like a watershed moment for me, actually. I knew that I really wanted kids. I 100% love children.
So probably quite a confusing feeling, I know I want kids, but why am I scared?
Yeah, it was very, very confusing, actually. And I guess it was the first time I realized that it's not that I didn't want to have kids. I realized that I just did not want kids with her. And that's quite a big thing to realize.
Especially when you're married to this person.
It's a big deal. And this was actually the first time of a number of times where the topic of children came up between us where it became quite a confrontation.
Had you discussed this before you were married, like whether you wanted kids and stuff, or?
I mean, I don't remember those conversations, but
because it's quite a big deal to realise afterwards, you know, or discuss afterwards.
I mean, knowing the type of person she is, I'm sure we had those discussions, and I would have said yes because, I mean, I did. It was I genuinely did. I couldn't imagine it. I mean, who does when they're young? You don't imagine what that's going to be like. But yeah, it was. I just got really, like a real tightening in my chest when I imagined her as a mother and me having to manage. I could see all the scenarios in my mind in the future where of her losing her shit, you know, in the ways, some of the ways I've described already, and then me having to manage that on top of managing a kid. And
yeah, to add a kid into the mix of already deep issues.
Yeah, and at this stage I wasn't really thinking about leaving. It was too soon for me. I knew that I was locked in. So to bring a kid into that mix would have just been so damaging. Anyway, and this was on holiday as well, so the things got a little bit weird for a wee bit. Anyway, we got back to London. Turns out that, you know, obviously nothing had happened. It was just a figment of her imagination. And I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm being too mean here, but this was not the first time that strange things happened with her medically that could possibly have been
she would put it this way, she was a hypochondriac, so everything, like the smallest minute thing that would come up, it would be like, you know, a big deal. And, you know, allergies would be
she would get really strange symptoms that were basically unexplainable, but she'd always have an explanation, of course, and she'd, you know, sometimes connect certain dots that most people wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, that's all I really want to say about that. I don't want to sound like I'm getting too personal in my, you know, I don't want to attack personally or anything like that. But I will say that I was incredibly relieved when it turned out that was a false alarm. And you know, years later, still feel that sense of relief.
Gosh, things could have been so different.
It would have completely changed everything. But we went back to London. Things continued on for a while. I'm trying to think of other major things that happened in that time. It was relatively smooth. There was still the same drama that we had. There are things that I don't remember, but I think outside observers would have noticed. We had a wee bit of drama at the church, actually. I just remembered this. That she made a very public post on Facebook about my employer just so happened to be, I'd met him through church and he'd got me this job. And she made a very public statement on Facebook about something about slave labor because I was doing such long hours. And can you imagine, like, someone's partner makes a statement about someone that you both know, that all your friends know, and she knows that people are going to see this, but says it anyway. It was so embarrassing. It was so incredibly embarrassing. I got pulled into the office of this guy at work. He was like, "Have you seen this?" Because I had no idea.
Oh my god!
He's like, "I've just seen this posted on Facebook. Can you explain what this is about? Like, are you unhappy? Why didn't you come and talk to me about it?" And I was like, "Holy shit!" And I was like, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Yeah, like I actually thought I was about to get fired. Like that's how big it was at that time. And I remember calling her straight after that meeting and saying, you know, I was really mad, as I think I had a right to be.
Justifiably.
And I called up and I was like, take it down, you know, you almost got me fired. I was quite mad. I didn't yell at her, but I was definitely mad. And later on, it was another fight between us because she was defending her actions. Like, this is something I've been doing. This was me standing up for you because you're not standing up for yourself. And it became my fault.
Of course it did.
Yeah, it became a big deal. But there was a lot of fallout in the church because everyone had seen it, right? So she took it down, but it was too late. And then at church it was so tense, and people were like kind of jokingly saying things to me, and I was like, don't. Because I didn't want to engage with it because I knew I wasn't comfortable enough to talk about things that I obviously was at a point, looking back now, where I was starting to see that things were noticeable to other people. The holes were there. I was noticing it, but I couldn't talk about it. It was too much. Yeah, it was cringe.
Makes me feel mad for you. To be like,
yeah, it was really rough. Probably one other notable story from that time before we switch back to you, Briar, is not long before we were going to go back to Australia, back to Melbourne. I had a friend, one of my uni friends, he was coming over to do his exchange, and we met up in London, and he was a good mate, and we decided that we were going to go on this trip, a day trip. And at this stage, things were not good between my partner and I. I think there was no physical intimacy. There was constant awkwardness. I think there was a stage that we slept in separate beds when we could, like when we went away for a weekend or something and slept in separate beds. That was a big deal. And anyway, he came along, and it just so happened to be right in the middle of this. And as you know, she was not able to keep things to herself, right?
No.
And it became very, very intensely obvious how unhappy she was with me. It was,
and she always she was very passive aggressive too, and as well as just being normal aggressive, but she would say and do things right in front of other people.
Yeah.
And even stuff like stamping her foot like a child, having a tantrum. I remember her doing that.
Yeah, it was so weird because we had such a great time. I was really enjoying hanging out with him. It was like, oh my God, I have a friend, because I hadn't had a friend this whole time really. And we did some traveling around the southeast, around Kent. And we went out to Dover, we caught the ferry over, went to France for a day, came back, went to a castle and stuff. Through that whole day, it was just full of tension. Full of it. Every time her and I were too close to each other, she'd say something or make some kind of drama over the smallest things. And then I felt so sorry for my mate because he kept trying to ignore it, but it was just so obvious. And then she started directing her anger towards him. And she was so rude. Oh my Lord. Oh my days. She was so rude at one particular point, and I was like, I just want to die. I just want to die. We've never really spoken about it, my friend and I, properly since then. But there was one. I mean, it may sound really small, but this was like the climax of the day. We're driving back into London and coming up not too far from our house, and she's in the backseat trying to tell me what to do, like constantly just giving me instructions. And this is pretty normal. I was used to it. I hated it, but I was used to it. And she was getting more and more rude to me. And then my mate's like, oh, I'll just get out my GPS on his phone. And he was trying to help him. And then she snapped him. She's like, well, we live here. Thanks. And he was like, oh, wow. Okay. And then that was basically the last time in that particular trip that I saw him. I didn't see this guy for another couple of years. And
I'm sure he didn't want to put himself through that again.
Yeah, that was shit. It was really shit, I'm not going to lie. Because it was such a happy time mixed with so much. Like, that particular trip, without her there, would have been a dream trip for me. Because one thing I've always wanted is to explore places I really want to explore, but with friends. And this was it. Going to castles and seeing like medieval shows and knights and playing with big bows and arrows and all these like really cool like boy type activities. And then she fucking ruined it. And this was not, as you know, the last time that she ruined a holiday.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, I think we came back. It was the week that we were about to head back to Melbourne. So it really was a moment, really, really bittersweet moment. I did not want to go back to Melbourne. I had in fact investigated staying in London and becoming an international student there, but it was just so gosh darn expensive. It was just impossible. So I just was resigned to the fact that I'd have to go back. And my partner was pretty keen to go back and I think enjoy some stability again. But yeah, I was pretty sad, pretty depressed. Anyway, I think like probably going to switch it back over to you because there's also a whole period of a part of your life that I don't really have any knowledge of. So, I mean, just to recap, so you'd split with your partner. What happened immediately? What happened immediately after you split?
It's a bit of a blur, to be honest. I feel like I guess I must have blocked out a lot of that. I just pretty much spent the next year and a half blocking out those feelings and trying to fill voids. I was going out a lot, meeting people.
Where were you living? Because last time you talked about you living in a couple of temporary flats.
Yeah, so I think I talked about being in my friend's place.
With the druggie?
Yeah, with the druggie. So I kind of bounced around a few different places. And then eventually, I definitely bounced between different flats, but I'm just trying to think, oh, that's right. I moved into a flat with some people I didn't know, but I paid for a room. It was a pretty nice room, actually. Expensive, but I was earning pretty good money as a nanny. And that year, 2011, 2012, I did a lot of travel.
Were you live in?
No, I was living in this flat and in East London, and I would travel every day to Notting Hill in West London for my job, and I was working long hours, sort of like 8 till 7 every day. And on top of that, we were traveling like every few weeks. 2012 was probably my busiest year in terms of travel. I did some of my own travel, and I was traveling with the family a lot too. But I think directly after I left my partner, I really wanted to go. Looking back now, actually, it was quite brave, but I wanted to do a trip on my own, just to sort of prove to myself that I was independent and don't need no man. So I booked a trip to Spain and did a trip there, and I was in Valencia. And I went and explored the city. I met people there. And it was actually really empowering to be like, I can do this. I really am a strong person, and that sort of reiterated to me that I would be okay. And then straight after that, when I got back, like I travelled to the States with the family, to Miami and New York. I went to France quite a lot. That was somewhere we went frequently. So I was busy, which was good, what I needed at that time, I think. And I was on top of like my normal day-to-day wage. I was earning, the family would pay me huge bonuses for going away with them, because when we travelled, I was essentially the mum. I was on call 24/7 for the kids, daytime, nighttime. So it was hard going, but we stayed in some of the most amazing places, like things that places I would never have got the opportunity to see, well, through a luxury lens anyway, on my own.
What was your favourite destination?
This is going to sound really pretentious, but there was a few different places, but the Bahamas and Mauritius were probably my top places that we went to. just exactly how you imagine, like the Bahamas, just the clearest water, the whitest sand. And actually it was a lot more relaxed there. Like we stayed in the most amazing 2-storied villa right on the beach. And yes, I had the kids, but it was super relaxed. Like the parents would go off and play golf all day. And we had a little, like this golf cart thing that I took the kids around because we were on one of the islands called, it was from Nassau. Anyway, so we had this golf buggy. I used to just drive the kids around and I'd take them out to nice restaurants and, I had spending money to do stuff with them. So actually it was really cool. And also at that particular place, we had hopefully this doesn't sound rude, but a big mama. She was a lady from there, but she, like, cliche, what's that movie? The Professor...
Big Mama's House.
Yeah, Big Mama's House. Like, looked like that, and she would come and cook us the most amazing meal. So usually when we were living in London at home, I'd have to do all the cooking and stuff. So it was so nice to have a break from that. And she would cook, like, 3-course meals, like the freshest fish, like fish tacos. And occasionally she's like, I'll look after the kids and you go to the beach. And so, it was quite nice. A lot more sort of relaxed there.
Do you, I mean, obviously you're going through this kind of real high point of seeing all the stuff that most people wouldn't see in a lifetime. And then, you've got, and the best part of those experiences, you've got the luxury.
Yeah.
How were you negotiating the fact that you were having this high life, but you're also now doing it essentially alone?
Yeah.
How did you feel? Did you feel like it was a distraction, or were you just enjoying it?
Yeah, I think a bit of both, really. I think I was too busy to realised that I was hurting and lonely, which was, like I said, it was what I needed at the time, to be kept busy. And I hadn't even told my boss. My boss didn't even realise that I had separated from my husband. And I remember one time she said to me, it was just before we were flying out to Miami, and I said, I'll stay the night at their house before flying out in the morning. And she's like, don't you want to like spend the last night with your husband or whatever? And I was like, actually we're not together anymore, and we haven't been for a little while. And she was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like I didn't, and that's always been something for me, was keeping my work and home life separate. Like, you don't talk about that stuff, you leave that shit at home.
But I mean, did you talk about it at all though? Like, do you feel like you were processing it, or you just
I don't think so
on?
I don't think so. I think I was just determined to move on, live my life, forget about that stuff. So I just kind of blanked it out, I think, and did anything I could to keep busy.
I mean, on that, keeping busy, outside of obviously your work life was taking up a lot of your time, but when you went home, it's when you're at home, right? When you
the quiet moments.
The quiet moments, because having been through this, those are the hardest times.
Yep. So I definitely had those times where that loneliness hit hard. I started to explore like online dating, or not even really online dating. It was more, I just wanted to meet people and make connections, because I had some other nanny friends, but I kind of felt like I needed more. So I actually joined this Antipodean group where, if you don't understand that term, it's where, Kiwis and Aussies living in London, basically. So I wanted to meet some like-minded people and connect. And I ended up meeting... I met a few people in there and made a couple of surface-level friendships. But I actually met a guy and went on a date with him, although the plan was just to meet for friendships and connections. We ended up going on a date, and ended up dating for about 6 months, actually. That was probably must have been beginning of 2012.
Were you dating other people through this time as well?
Yeah.
Because, this would have been the first time that you would have experienced the open world of dating.
Yeah, and because I'd always been, like, I think it...
quote-unquote dating as well.
Yeah. So, I'd been in 2 serious relationships. Obviously, the marriage was, like, the longest. I sort of was meeting other people, and again, it was unfulfilling, but at the time it just felt like, again, something to do, a reason to go out and be distracted and meet people. And part of it was, I guess, exciting because I had the freedom for the first time in my life to do what I wanted to do, solely me. I wasn't responsible to anyone or for anyone. So that was, quite a busy time of my life.
Well, I mean, because you've mentioned some things to me already about your quote unquote party days. And I think everybody who goes through a breakup of that type, a long-term breakup, is pretty normal to kind of go a little bit wild.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely did.
So, what was wild? Because wild means different things to different people.
Yeah.
What was wild for you?
Well, I mean, I was drinking a lot, going out partying sort of any day of the week, really. And looking back now, I don't know how I managed. Sometimes you think, shit, I got in at like 4 a.m. and went to work the next day, kind of thing. There's no way I could do that now.
You can't stay up past 9 o'clock.
No. And I got myself into some situations that I shouldn't have been in. And I guess, like you say, everyone goes through that, especially after a breakdown of a serious long-term relationship.
It's funny, though, because it's not something you would recommend to anybody. But at the same time, the lessons you learn from that kind of shit stay with you much longer than, if you hadn't, right?
Yeah, definitely. But then, like I said, I was dating this guy, and I was probably dating him for maybe 6 months. It must have been 2011, so the same year I broke up with my ex. Anyway, so we were seeing each other, and he was actually quite a controlling person, and he was physically quite large, very, very tall, like, I don't know, 6'6", 6'7", something like that, but very large.
Large and tall.
Yes. And we decided that we were going to go back, because he was Australian. We decided we were going to go back, see his family for Christmas in Australia. And at the time, my mum and dad were living in Darwin, so we were like, we were going to go to New York for Christmas and then go to Australia to meet each other's parents, and kind of, I guess, started to feel a little bit more serious. But there was a lot of issues under the surface there. And also I'd the same year just come out of a long-term relationship, so I don't know why I jumped into that.
Well, it's not unusual, though, right?
I guess that's what people call a rebound.
But you have your fun, but then you realise that
it's unfulfilling.
It's unfulfilling, and so you try to fill the void.
Yeah.
And you're more likely and more vulnerable, and especially in that first year, to kind of fill the void with the wrong person or the wrong things.
And I wouldn't even say he filled that void. Like, he wasn't actually that nice. He wasn't very nice to me. Like, there was definitely moments where he was, but like I said, he was very controlling and a little bit abusive, actually.
What were some of the ways in which that was expressed?
Mostly through his words, like he could be he'd put me down all the time. And, you can only handle that for so long before you realise, like, hang on a second, like, this, it really just doesn't feel nice. Like, when I'm with you, this doesn't feel nice. And at the time I was living in a flat with, like, 3 other guys. And, like, we just genuinely got on really well. We'd go out to the pub drinking, and he felt very threatened by these friendships. And that's all they were just friendships. And he felt very threatened, and he had quite jealous behaviour. All the things that you can imagine, he said and did based off jealousy. And in the end, that's what sort of disintegrated our relationship. But, like, I remember when we broke up, I had gone to visit him in Oxford, where he was working, and which is about an hour or so out of London. And I can't remember exactly what happened, but he I don't know. I must have got a text from my flatmate or something, and he absolutely flipped out and was like, "That's it, pack your stuff, like fuck off." And I was like, "What the hell? Like I don't know where I am." But he made me. He was so angry. So I packed my things and I left. We were staying in a hotel, and I was just stood. This was like the middle of the night. I was just stood in the car park outside this hotel, and it wasn't like in the city or anything. It was sort of out in the middle of nowhere, like not knowing what to do. Like, where do I, like, he's just kicked me out onto the street, and I didn't know where to go, which was quite scary. And also, like, yeah, the fact that he did that speaks volumes. But anyway, I think I just got a taxi. I can't remember where I went. I must have just said to the nearest hotel or something. Yeah, and that was it. And he cancelled the flights and stuff that we were supposed to go on. And I'd paid like a couple of $1,000 towards these tickets to go to New York and Australia. And he never gave me back the money. He was just so angry. He just couldn't give me back the money.
On reflection, I mean, now that we can look back at the narrative of life in your past relationship experience, previously we talked about the fact that in your other relationships, when things weren't looking good, you were pretty tough and you said enough is enough and moved on. Did you find this particular situation harder to walk away from?
I don't think so, because we'd been dating maybe 6 months, and there were things throughout that 6 months where there was red flags. So I probably wasn't as deeply emotionally connected to him. So it was probably easier just to be like, bye.
Yeah.
But actually he found it quite hard, even though he, had broken up with me in Oxford. I remember him coming round to my house and still trying to contact me. And I was just like, stood by my decision, because I was like, that's disgusting behaviour to kick me out in the middle of nowhere, place I didn't know. It was midnight. So I was just like black and white with it. I was like, no. And yeah, he kept trying to get me back, but in the end that just fizzled out because I wasn't responding to his messages. So, and that was around Christmas time, so that was kind of shitty.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, the people that we end up with directly after being in a long relationship. The kind of people that we choose, I think, says a lot about the stage that we're at and the people that we had left as well. And I think when we get to the point of, back to my story, a few years in the future from where we are now, it was actually really interesting for me, the kind of boxes I put myself in when it came to choosing a new partner. But I think we'll have to pause it there, because we've been going on for quite a while already. But I think where we'll pick up again is just talking a little bit more about your single life journey, and then we'll switch back to me and talk about my life in Melbourne. But we are trying to pick up the pace a little bit, as we're kind of, as we have touched on before, we're in the kind of final stages of our stories, not the final stages of the podcast necessarily, and we'll be sharing more of that in the future. But I guess just to prepare you, Briar's story and my story in terms of where we're at, what we're trying to do in this podcast, is coming to its final chapters. However, I also just wanted to do a quick reminder, tag this on at the end. Feel free to follow along on our journey on the socials, something I haven't actually talked about yet, I realised in our episodes. But you can follow along with us on Instagram on ourstory_pod. That's right, yeah.
Or you can just look up This Is Our Story. I guess it would come up.
Yeah, so we are now kind of across all the podcast platforms as well. But on the Instagram, you can see some extra photo content, and drop us a message if you would like to give us some feedback. We also have a Facebook page now, just This Is Our Story, and you can see some extra content there as well. Trying to get a little bit, it would be great to have a little bit more interaction, actually. We've been getting feedback individually and independently, which has been pretty cool, actually, to hear from all these people who have been listening in. But yeah, just to reiterate, again, thank you so much for following along. Many of you have been following along from the beginning, so thanks for that. And anyway, we'll be checking out now and checking in very soon for our next episode. So thanks for joining.
Bye.